Thank you for listening to Scandinavian Crimes Podcast. Be sure to check out the episode links and be part of our other social media platforms where you can leave a topic suggestion or even share some of your insights regarding the subject matter of the episode. We'll always do our best to provide a well-researched episode, but sometimes due to limited access, translation issues, and inconsistent evidence between multiple sources, there can be information that's lost. It is therefore good to do your own research and get a deeper understanding of a case of your own interest. So with that all said, let's start today's episode.
Welcome to Scandinavian Crimes. My name is Devante, and say hello to my lovely co-host, Delila.
Hi.
And on this podcast, we talk about famous Scandinavian criminals who made their mark throughout Scandinavian history. So today, based on the title in which you're listening to this episode, this is part 2 of the Olle Möller case. Now, just to clarify once again, I had some computer issues, so some of the episodes did not, I think the last 2 episodes didn't really address the computer issue.
No.
But now, since we got that corrected, you'll hear now that yes, everything worked out just fine. But
Eventually.
Either way, eventually, right? So, so this case is just covering part 2 of Olle Möller. This is all regarding a boy who rose from poverty and became a celebrated running star, and how he had tons and tons of fans, but later was accused of sexually assaulting a young girl and killing her. So this is just part 2 of that story. If you did not hear this episode, it's the episode before the last one that came out, if I remember correctly. But yes, you can just see on the podcasting platform, Olle Möller Murder Part 1. So just go back to the episode, catch up to get some of the details of Part 1, and then come back here, and then we can kind of keep things going to your satisfaction. So you already know what I'm about to say. Grab your tea, grab your snacks. If you're on your way to work and you're on the bus or the train, tuck yourself into your nice little corner, put in your headphones, and put the volume at an exceptional level that you feel is most comfortable, because this is Olle Möller Part 2. In 1956, 5-year-old Kerstin Blom was found raped and murdered near the water of Albysjön, south of Stockholm. Everything felt eerily similar. Kerstin had last been seen at St. Eriksplan, just 100 meters from where Gerd disappeared. Olle had once again been seen driving around the area at the same time. Witnesses claimed they had seen Olle with the girl, insisting he picked her up in his car. The case seemed clear. Once a murderer, always a murderer. Olle was then arrested. Despite his constant claims of innocence, the police were convinced that he was Kerstin's murderer. After a week of intense interrogation, the evidence remained too weak and Olle was released, much to the frustration of law enforcement. Though free, Olle was not exonerated. Hate mail flooded his mailbox and the phone rang incessantly at night. Customers avoided him and police surveillance added to his anxiety. Olle decided to leave Stockholm, relocating with his wife and daughter to his childhood home in Huddinge near Örebro. On a poultry farm close to the paper worker's house, life became quieter and safer. But then Ruth Lind from Fjugestad went missing. 34-year-old Ruth, neatly dressed in her coat and hat, had been in the hospital for a few days due to back problems. She was fitted for a support corset at the orthopedic clinic and planned to take the 5 o'clock train home. On May 26, 1959, Ruth spent the day wandering between departments. Just before 5, she finished her appointment. An hour later, her husband, Gunnar, waited at the Fjugestad station, watching passengers disembark. Ruth was not among them. Worried, Gunnar reported her missing the next day. The police issued alerts, organized search parties, and combed the forest around their farm, but Ruth was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, the murderer had stopped his car on the forest road outside of Fjugestad. The murderer wanted to force sex, and when Ruth refused his advances, he grew enraged and violently attacked her. He yanked her from the car and strangled her, but she managed to break free. He attempted to hit her in the face, but once again she slipped from his grasp. Then he caught her from behind, striking her repeatedly in the head. On the third blow, Ruth sank to the ground, lifeless. The murderer ran back to his car and drove away. Early the next morning, the murderer returned, lifted Ruth's body, and dragged her to the car. He drove to the forest road in Delila on the other side of Örebro and dumped the body behind a large stack of firewood. He covered her with a thick layer of brush and left the scene. Under pressure, the police scrambled to piece together the case. Ruth was last seen outside the hospital at 5 o'clock on May 26. Tips poured in daily. An acquaintance at the hospital reported Ruth mentioned getting a ride from a man in a checkered shirt. Other visitors saw a man in a shirt moving from room to room just before 5. The police had a lead and prioritized finding this shirted man. Olle had been at the clinic that same day. He had injured his back and went to the hospital to see a doctor. He was wearing a blue checkered shirt, and the police immediately focused on Olle. They placed his home under surveillance and rumors began to spread. This is when the situation became unbearable for Olle. On June 1st, a farmer found a discarded dental prosthesis near the forest road in Delila, but didn't connect it to the missing woman from the news. On June 25th, the police became interested, and the farmer showed them the location. 20 meters away, Ruth's body was found under the brush. She had throat injuries, head lacerations, and a fractured skull. A forensic pathologist determined she was brutally attacked, but there was no evidence of rape. 4 days later, as Olle was leaving Örebro, the police arrested him. At the police station, the pressure on Olle intensified. Repeatedly, he recounted his actions on May 26. He explained how he had gone to the hospital for an arch support and waited in reception before deciding around 2 o'clock to return another day. Around 3:30, Olle took his moped to the market hall to get paid for egg deliveries. After that, he went home to change clothes and then at 5:30 p.m. returned to the market hall to help fishmonger Möller-Gerd with some task. He then went to the biscuit factory where he had been promised feed for his hens. Afterward, he went home to Hingstad and spent the night there. He insisted he had no memory of seeing her in the waiting room. The interrogations were tense, as if the case outcome was predetermined. Initially, Olle denied seeing Ruth at the hospital. However, after several witnesses confirmed they had seen them together, he changed his story. More witnesses began to come forward. After several months, police claimed to have seen the fish truck in various locations in the forests. Many testimonies were surprisingly detailed, given the time that had passed, and the reasons for the delay in coming forward remained unclear. In total, 104 individuals have reported seeing something regarding the case, and the identifications increasingly pointed towards Olle. Despite all this, no one knew where or how Ruth had been killed. The trial against Olle began October 28th at the district court in Hallsberg, with people lining up for hours to secure a seat. Olle's lawyer argued that his explanations were more than sufficient for his immediate release. However, the prosecutor claimed Olle had approached Ruth at the hospital, arranged to drive her home, borrowed fishmonger Möller-Gerd's green truck, and picked up Ruth just before 5 p.m. He allegedly made an advance towards her, and then she rejected him, killed her in a fit of rage, and dumped her body. Despite Möller-Gerd denying lending Olle the truck, the prosecutor insisted this was the sequence of events. Olle felt calm, confident that this time he couldn't be convicted based on false testimonies. He had a solid alibi for the entire day. The prosecutor hoped to find fish scales on Ruth's clothes to prove she had been in Möller-Gerd's truck, but the analysis was disappointing. The rest of the technical investigation also yielded little useful evidence. The pathologist noted that Ruth had lost 1.5 liters of blood, but no blood was found in Möller-Gerd's truck or on Olle's clothes. Consequently, the prosecutor focused on the witnesses. One witness saw something resembling Olle driving the fish truck with a woman by his side near the rubber factory in Nibla. Other witnesses saw the truck heading back toward Örebro shortly after. The prosecutor mapped out a circular route where Ruth was believed to have been murdered and disposed of. The critical question was whether Ruth could have been picked up in Örebro at 5 p.m., driven through the circular route, and Olle still returned to the city by 6 p.m. when he was seen at the market. The prosecutor argued it was possible, while Olle's defense attorney disagreed. On August 5th, 1960, the verdict was announced. It was determined beyond a reasonable doubt that Olle had murdered Ruth during the drive on May 26, 1959. The court believed the witnesses who identified Olle, dismissing Mellgren's testimony. Olle appealed, but his efforts were in vain. The following year, the appellate court increased his sentence to 11 years in a secure facility. Life in prison had changed since Olle's last incarceration. The guards were kinder, the food was better, and he was allowed to keep a radio and newspaper in his cell. Despite these improvements, he struggled to adapt, especially in the evenings. He longed to escape the bitterness and the coincidences that had ruined his life. After 7 years, Olle received his first day of release and returned to Hedingstad to celebrate his 60th birthday. However, he fell out of place. The house was deteriorating and the furniture had been rearranged. Life had moved on without him. A year later, his wife filed for divorce. Many police officers still believed Olle was guilty of Kerstin's murder, but some doubted his guilt and continued investigating. In 1963, Carl Hugo Fernström was apprehended for the murder of Kerstin and confessed when faced with compelling evidence. Carl worked as a driver and farmhand. He had 3 marriages, 2 of which ended in divorce due to incidences of abuse and sexual misconduct that were never reported. He was also convicted of raping his stepdaughter. Carl became a suspect in Kerstin's murder case because his former wife recalled that the bag in which Kerstin was found had a distinctive patch which belonged to Carl. Subsequently, the ex-wife contacted the police. Forensic evidence was collected from his residence. This included furniture and other trophies he had collected, which led to his conviction in 1965, where he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Carl's history of sexual abuse, his physical resemblance to Olle, and his mention of Gerd during the interrogation raised suspicions that he may have been responsible for the murder for which Olle had been convicted. As new details emerged, lawyers and journalists began to question Olle's guilt in the murders of both Gerd and Ruth. New details emerged about Gerd's murder, including neighbors who claimed they had seen her playing with another dog of the same breed as Olle's, which explained the dog hairs found on her coat. Bolstered by this new information, Olle requested a retrial in Supreme Court, but his plea was denied. On the morning of Friday, October 9th, 1970, 64-year-old Olle walked out of Norrköping prison. Towards the end of his life, new information emerged in Ruth's case. An internal police investigation revealed significant shortcomings, including ignored reports of a second green truck. Also, a woman came forward stating a man had confessed to Ruth's murder. He was questioned and began to make admissions, but he died just weeks before his formal interrogation. At home in Hedingstad, Olle's health deteriorated. Diabetes led to an amputation, leaving him a runner without legs. At 77, he lived alone with his Rottweiler, chickens, and trophies, but he refused to give up. Olle requested a retrial in the Supreme Court one last time. 2 years later, the verdict came. It was denied. Olle, the impoverished child and running enthusiast, had been wrongfully convicted twice. He maintained his innocence, believing in vindication until the end. He wanted to clear his name, to walk freely without being seen as a murderer. Tragically, while out walking on his prosthetics, Olle fell and broke his femoral neck, leading to his death on March 22, 1983, never having the chance to vindicate himself.
Yeah, so before we start the discussion, I just wanted to say something. We noticed later or afterward that Devante might have said Gerd a couple of times, and in Swedish we pronounce it Gerd. So Gerd, Gerd, the same person, the same child that unfortunately died in part 1. So with that all said, I'm just gonna say one thing, the same question I asked at the part 1. Do you think he, after all this, still did it? Or do you think that he was innocent with everything?
Well, I will never truly know, but in my personal opinion, I want to specify that in my personal opinion, I think it is very likely that he may have not done it. And you already know what I'm probably about to say. I think a lot of this case was dictated by public opinion. So
back then, yes.
Even the first case, even though he was a celebrity runner,
the news had so much influence in the whole case, and because he was a popular figure of a running athlete, a lot of people were involved in this.
Yeah, even in the first one, some of the people who came forward were some of the people who bullied him when he was younger. And then they started to dictate the narrative. Oh, he was weird when he was young. And then it started to shift the opinion of people and how they viewed him, even though he won so many competitions and was the people's athlete. But then how quickly they turned on him just because, a person who had a vendetta against, or people who had a vendetta against him, changed the narrative. And once he was convicted of that, then basically he always had this stigma. And even when it was shown, in evidence, like I said, we don't know for sure. I'm just saying from what I'm understanding of the story. Even when the evidence shown that he wasn't the person who likely committed this crime at all, that there was other accounts and things that they didn't report, which is absolutely...
And he had an alibi too.
Yeah, he had a solid alibi. They didn't report a second truck. There was just other things that they just did not report because the police felt, oh no, I want it to be him. They didn't do their jobs. They failed. And he never had the opportunity to clear his name, even though it is blatantly obvious by reading the story. But once again, we can't say officially that it's very likely he didn't commit the murder. And
but what are the odds that he would be in the hospital the same day during kind of like around the same time as Ruth? Yeah. And I just feel like, can such a coincidence really, I'm not saying like he did it or not. I'm just trying to be like devil's advocate.
Devil's advocate, here. Yeah. No. I mean, it's entirely possible because, as you know, I live in New York City, right? Let's say, for example, God forbid, because that would make my life difficult. Let's say I go into a hospital. The chances of me walking into a hospital with someone who's going to get killed within the next month or two is likely. I can walk into the same supermarket as someone who might die in a short amount of time. God forbid, obviously. I want everyone to have a nice long life. Mm-hmm. But I'm just saying, in terms of the numbers, it's still likely. Even in Sweden, where this took place, it's likely that you can meet someone, run into someone, and then a couple weeks later, they could be gone for whatever reason. It could be a hit and run accident. It can be an abuse situation. But the difference is we have technology. So now we have cameras. So obviously it's a lot harder for someone to commit a crime and then just get away with it without any kind of evidence being, presented like, okay, this person did it. But that's besides the point. This is back in when this took place, the 60s.
This is a quite old case.
Yeah.
But do you mean part one or part two?
Well, I mean, the culmination of everything.
The conviction was, I think, around the 1960s. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the time when police work globally was trash. There was no actual investigation of anything. It was mostly based off of wrong circumstantial evidence. It's not just Sweden. It was also in the United States as well. There were a lot of cases that even after the people who got arrested died, there were cases that were overturned because of the lack of police work and how corrupt the police system really was back in those times, because there was no investigative work. They just was trying to arrest someone for the sake of saying, oh, I did my job. But then as we find out, the killer was still out there and had the bag that she had. But because people had an opinion about him, they were determined to make it him.
So based from your based from the information that is presented in the part one and part two, you believe that he was wrongfully convicted for both cases, and that it was just he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time for many of those occasions.
Yeah, I say more so the second case. Yeah, I say more so the second case
was unlucky,
Yeah, that was just pure unluck and bias. The first case, I can't say guarantee because they didn't suggest anything else that was overwhelmingly, but it's still very likely because just on how the case was taken care of, there wasn't really any evidence to really suggest it was him. It was all circumstantial.
Yeah.
But, you know, the narrative was just shifted by people who had a vendetta against him, thus turning the public against him, trying to make it seem like he was weird from the day he was born or something.
Yeah. So because of this case, it's been highly studied or criticized, and it's a very popular case that still people talk about till this day, and how much the media was, you know, very heavily criticizing everything, and also how much influence the media had. So, you know, I also believe that he probably was at the wrong place at the wrong time, especially for the second part. But also, based on what people have criticized and experts have been talking and discussing about this case, it seems that he was innocent. But, you know, I think that's good for you guys to do your own research and have your own opinion about it. I think that I was a bit sad when I wrote the second part because I might have, because I was using information that might have been very biased. But, you know, I'm always trying to write in a very unbiased way. But, you know, in this case, it sounded like it was a lot of information based from his opinion and also from experts discussing the scenario. So I would love for you guys to just, you know, do your own research, have your own opinions about it. But this was as much information that I could get. And it could be that he was innocent, but, you know, it's always good to do your own research. But yeah, so I guess that's pretty much it, you know?
Yeah.
Unfortunate that he got no justice and he died.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, anyone who knows me for the new year 2025, and one thing I want to continue is to give the best advice I possibly can to all my people out there. This is like, you know, the story like this is very, it's a cautionary tale, as they were saying, you know, that when you're kind of dealing with situations like this, or even something, maybe not to such an extreme degree, be wary of rushing to judgment, especially when it comes to the influence of media and the justice system in general. It is still very fallible and they make a lot of mistakes. Even today, the justice system is not perfect, but it's mostly just, I want to put emphasis on media literacy. When someone presents you with information, and especially in this day and age, coming from the country that I come from, funny, right? You know, we have this whole thing, speaking of, like, you know, alternative news or, you know, fake news, whatever the case may be. When you receive information from the media, from people, from anyone, you know, sure, you can listen, but don't always take information at face value. You know, do your own research. You know, make sure you're looking at your own information. You're coming to your own conclusions. You're trying to do it from an unbiased opinion. Put aside your own personal feelings about someone or something. And then very often, you know, the truth is somewhere in there. And I'm talking about the way that Neil deGrasse Tyson would say, the objective truth. Yeah. It's somewhere in there when you try to separate your own personal bias and the bias you may be receiving from a media source or maybe even information that's posted online. Look at the details, look at the inconsistencies, pay attention to what is inconsistent, and just make sure you're coming to your own conclusions. You're developing your own opinions, because you're likely going to start to see some of the things don't add up and make sense. And then you'll start to critically think about the world around you, which is important because that is how we develop and move forward as a human race. And, you know, by questioning everything, and we learn. And then we can learn from those mistakes, and we learn to think. And, you know, eventually we can move past a point where such, you know, childish tactics, in my opinion, of putting out false information or biased information, we can move past it and actually become better as people and be better and do better things. So I hope you all enjoyed the podcast episode today.
Yes.
You already know that the following week on Monday, we will be dropping another episode. And to end such a horrible, horrible experience on a positive note, we are going to end it with some food. What food are you craving today?
The very used to be trendy Korean cucumber salad, spicy cucumber salad with some rice and some tofu stew.
Sounds interesting. I am craving myself some Korean fried chicken.
That sounds delicious. We just went Korean for some reason here.
Yeah, I saw a video last night.
Me too.
And this chicken was so crispy. I was like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I want some Korean fried chicken so badly, but I'm trying to be responsible and not spend money in the street. But I don't know. Today might be my cheat day.
Me too.
I'm trying to be responsible.
Be responsible.
But, yes. Stay safe out there, my friends.
Take care, everybody.
Remember, take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. Pay attention. Think critically. Do your own research. And ladies, fight till the very end. If you ever end up in a situation like this, and I hope you don't, especially if you're one of our listeners,
use proof like phone, the technology. Very useful. Something you didn't have in the 1960s.
Yeah. Use whatever you got to, get out of those situations. Hit someone with a phone, crack it over their head, do whatever you got to do.
Oh, I meant like video recording. Like, where
absolutely.
You been?
But video recording is not going to save you in the moment. You're like using it
as a weapon. Okay. Well.
Yes. Because, in a moment, like, I'm recording you. It's not going to stop anybody. But, do what you got to do. And we shall see you next week.
Yes. Bye.
Peace out.